Tertia, Optio, here we go!
So remember in our previous episode how I was talking about CIA coming to town and showing you who's boss? This book here, Annie Jacobson, chapter 2 even, is called Tertia, Optio, which means it's the third option that the president has when the first option, which is diplomacy, doesn't work, and the second option, which is catastrophic, is unconscionable, which is war. The third option is Tertia, Optio. So it basically talks about having a special ops guy or team of assassins, if you will, basically do the job. So I'm gonna set this up right, chum. And I'm gonna go ahead and just read this real quick. It's a couple of pages. We'll get through it, but I want you to understand the level of intensity that we have around here. So check this out. 6 months passed. One night in April 1946, America's ambassador to the Soviet Union, General Walker Bedell Smith, was riding in his chauffeur-driven limousine headed to the Kremlin. He was set to meet with Joseph Stalin. Tempered yet tenacious, the former general was a man well-versed in military operations. During the time of war, Bedell Smith served as Eisenhower's chief of staff. Wartime colleagues called him Ike's Hatchet Man. General Eisenhower called him the greatest general manager of the war. An all-around intimidating figure, Bedell Smith was rarely one to express unease, and yet here he was feeling apprehensive about the way ahead. He served as President Truman's top diplomat now, and the issue at hand was how not to go to war with the Soviet Union. I believed myself more or less immune to excitement, but I must confess I experienced a feeling of tension as the hour for the interview approaching. Bedell Smith later recalled, "I thought the meeting might be a stormy one. World War II had been over for less than a year, and already Stalin was the new nemesis of the Western world. Stalin was paranoid and power mad. As premier of the Soviet Union, he ruled by terror. Since his rise to power in the early 1920s, he starved and killed millions of his own people and personally oversaw the assassination of rivals who threatened him, including Leon Trotsky, an early architect of the Soviet Union, whom he had ordered to be killed in Coyoacan, Mexico, in 1940. Stalin assassinated writers and philosophers unwilling to peddle propaganda and scientists and engineers who failed to solve his technology problems. In 1937, he had 8 of his top army generals executed in the Great Purge. You remember that word. During World War II, he had been one of America's most powerful allies, which made it necessary to look beyond his crimes and win the war. Now, from the perspective of the State Department officials to whom Walter Bedell Smith reported, Joseph Stalin was no longer behaving as a friend. Stalin knew only the logic of force, Keenan said. The Soviets were on the move, devouring territory around the globe. The United States had only one option. Stalin had to be stopped. Bedell Smith's mission was to find out how much more land Stalin intended to grab. To look at a map made the problem self-evident. Russia's human losses in World War II had been colossal, with some 20 million dead. But more troubling for the West were the territorial gains. During the war, Stalin's Red Army took possession of almost half of Europe, then kept as much of it after the Nazis capitulated. In 1946, power came in numbers. Military strength was still about the nation's potential army size. The U.S. population was around 140 million. Stalin ruled over 200 million Russians and another 100 million people living beyond the country's traditional borders in the land that had been grabbed. To make matters even more threatening, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were getting bigger by the season. Now, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics sounds like democratic socialism to me. The USSR was getting bigger by the season. The question Bedell Smith needed answered was simple but uncomfortable. How much further was Stalin willing to go? The embassy card deposited Bedell Smith at the Kremlin's main gate, and the ambassador was taken inside to Stalin's personal office building. There sat Stalin, his back to the wall, facing Bedell Smith as he entered. So behind the dictator hung massive oil portraits depicting the great Russian marshals, most of them on horseback. Bedell Smith spotted Suvorov and Kudorov, two military strategists noted for their expansionist views. Once seated, Bedell Smith spoke first through an interpreter. He discussed the most pressing issues from his State Department notes, watching Stalin as he took exaggerated draws on a long, thin cigar. By the time Bedell Smith finished talking, Stalin had picked up a red pencil and begun writing. But upon closer inspection, it was clear that Joseph Stalin was doodling. The ambassador was stunned. His drawings, repeated many times, looked over to me like lopsided hearts done in red, with a small question mark in the middle. Stalin entered the conversation by making a point about oil, Iranian oil. You don't understand the situation with regards to oil in Iran, Stalin said, suggesting that he could answer the ambassador's question with a singularly cryptic point. The Baku oil fields are a major source of supply. As Bedell Smith considered his response, Stalin took the opportunity to bring up a more personal matter. Lately, Great Britain and the United States had been teaming up against Russia and placing obstacles in their path, said Stalin. Bedell Smith was caught off guard. Did Stalin really believe that the United States and Great Britain are united in an alliance to thwart Russia? He asked. Stalin replied in a long, slow breath. Yes. I must affirm in the strongest possible terms that it is not the case, the U.S. ambassador insisted, except that it was true. An Iron Curtain and descended across the European continent, Churchill famously declared, from Warsaw to Berlin, all those famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere, and all the subject in one of those, not that another, to the Soviet influence, but a very high and in many cases increasing measure of control from Moscow. Churchill had compared Stalin to a puppet master. This infuriated Stalin. Like most tyrants, he resented any person who suggested that his popularity was based on the adoration of fear. Stalin had hated Churchill for decades. In 1919, Churchill tried to instigate war against Russia, Mother Russia, the motherland Russia, and persuaded the United States to join him in an armed occupation against parts of our territory. Stalin reminded Ambassador Bedell Smith, adding, lately he's been at it again. Stalin called a Westminster speech an unfriendly act and said that it was an unwarranted attack upon the USSR. He pointed out that the United States would never stand by passively, but such an insult was hurled in its direction. But Russia, as events of the past few years have proved, is not stupid, Stalin forewarned. We can recognize our friends from our potential enemies. Ambassador Bedell Smith was in a bind. He needed an answer for President Truman. So he asked Stalin directly, motherfucker, how far punk-ass Russia gonna go? Stalin paused. Motherfucker finally stopped doodling with his red-ass, punk-ass, stupid-ass hearts and question mark. He looked directly at Walter Bedell Smith and he replied in a monotone, which is like this almost as a robot, we're not going to go much further. But what exactly did much further mean? That was the enigma of 1946. Stalin ended the interview and the ambassador was shown the door. So 11 months later, the United States drew a line in the sand, not like the one Obama did with Syria, but declaring communism the enemy of democracy. Socialist, Democrat, Communism, the enemy of democracy. On March 12, 1947, in a dramatic speech to a joint session of Congress, President Truman warned the American people that Moscow had to be stopped. It must be the policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempts of subjugation, Truman said. Not like that, but you know. Without American help, darkness and cataclysm would descend in the world, and disorder might well spread throughout the entire Middle East. In a display of near unanimous support, the members of Congress took to their feet. For 2 minutes, President Truman enjoyed his first standing ovation since the end of the war. The speech marked the beginning of the Truman Doctrine, American foreign policy designed to confront and counter Soviet geopolitical expansion. Congress passed the National Security Act of 1947, resurrecting the U.S. military intelligence agencies and creating a national security apparatus for the modern era. The official act established the Central Intelligence Agency and the White House National Warfare Division for the president to command. It's another power dude has that you ain't do be know. Now you done been did, so here you go. To command on his authority and his alone, Jack. This unit was designed to be covert. George Kennan called it a guerrilla warfare corps for the commander-in-chief. Covert action would become the president's hidden hand, visibly only to those in his inner circle. The National Security Council directed the CIA to take control of these hidden hand operations, officially called covert action operations under Title 50 authority of the U.S. Code. The Department of Defense would work under a separate authority called Title 10, which outlines the role of the armed forces. This distinction remains in effect today. So during a National Security Council meeting in December of 1947, the president's advisor clarified that the CIA's covert action authority would include preventative direct action through paramilitary activities as a means of countering the vicious covert activities of the USSR. Direct action would become a key phrase in the CIA, one that allowed its officers and operators Title 50 authority not available to anyone else in the United States unless expressly directed by the president. The CIA's General Counsel Lawrence Houston requested clarification. How much autonomy would the CIA have in conducting these covert action operations? Lack of such specific direction may be considered a weakness in the National Security Act of 1947 that deserves further consideration by the Congress, Houston wrote. Don't know if he talks like that, but whatever. The following month, National Security Council Directive 10-2, NSC 10-2, provided the clarification Houston had sought. A new office was to be created inside the CIA called the Office of Special Projects, where covert actions would be planned and executed in peacetime. In war times, the CIA would coordinate its covert operations with the Defense Department and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Covert operations are understood to be all activity which are conducted or sponsored by this government against hostile foreign states or groups, according to the directives, but which are so planned and executed that, if uncovered, the U.S. government can plausibly disclaim any responsibility of them. Plausible deniability would hereafter allow U.S. presidents to say, I didn't know. For the first time in American history, the president had at his disposal a secret paramilitary organization authorized by Congress to carry out hidden hand operations to protect U.S. national security interests around the world. Before NSC 10-2, there were two ways in which U.S. foreign policy and national security were pursued. This is what we said in the beginning. The first operation was diplomacy in the Second War. Covert action was now the president's third option, or
Tertia Optio!
After diplomacy failed and a Title 10 military operation was deemed unwise, Tertia Optio was the final answer. guerrilla movements, underground army, sabotage, and assassination! In its first 2 years of existence, the CIA's covert operations concentrated on anti-communist partisan groups in Europe and the Eastern Bloc. Then, on June 25th, 1950, the unthinkable happened. The army of North Korea, backed by Soviet tanks and Chinese intelligence, invaded South Korea with the goal of reuniting the divided country under communist rule. The entire Western world was caught off guard. The CIA had failed to foresee an attack that the United States national security apparatus feared could be the opening salvo of World War III. The United Nations called upon the invading communist troops to cease fighting and withdraw to the 38th parallel. When the invaders refused, the UN Security Council looked to its members for help. I have ordered United States Air and Sea Forces to give the Korean government troops cover and support, President Truman announced. After just 5 years of peace, the country was at war again. Behind the lines, paramilitary operations were needed to augment conventional forces. The CIA surged ahead with plans to take the lead. So what's my problem with communism? The problem is everywhere you've seen with a centralized power or isolated power, there's always somebody who wants to do what they want to do for the sake of the nation, right? Something good, something prosperous, something powerful, something beautiful, all inclusive. Yet when that person has their ego stroked in a negative manner, what do? As they've always done. What does the dictator do? What does the king have the power to do? See, it's not so much as how America is bad, and what makes it better than any other nation that we've seen in history. So far as you can go back, you look at how long the earth has been in existence. You look at how far structured order has been implemented, and everywhere you look, there's always somebody or a group of people on top doing what they want. And that happens here now, right? The difference is our structure and our authority is broken into 3 equal branches, allegedly. There's a lot of room for debate, but that's how it's supposed to work. Not one centralized organization has all the power. It's broken into 3. So each are supposed to govern and self-balance so one doesn't have more power over us. So these recent videos aren't so much of a warning for us, constitutional people, Bill of Rights people, Declaration of Independence people. These videos up until now are more of a warning for you Antifa people, Black Lives Matter people, not in the sense of wanting to have systematic, authentic change in some areas that I actually agree with, but the backroom swindling, where the money goes, the money trail, y'all know what you're doing. Y'all know what it's going towards. Democratic primary allocations. Those of you who are causing a scene, ruining the lives and businesses of just us little people, that's really a warning to you. Because we know what our rights are. We know what we are capable of. And the last thing we want to have to do is turn against our brother. That Yugoslavian lady had mentioned how dictatorial oppression happened in her country. She saw it firsthand. She experienced it, and it's warning us about it. It's not so much a warning to us. It's a warning to you who want change, but for your own disposition that looks nothing like that of which our founders have instilled, how we have learned through this thing. It's a warning to you, for the sake of all things holy. Man, cut your shit, man. Because it's not going to be good for you. Because I know what I have to do to defend myself from people who want to take my stuff or rob or abuse me. I'm not going to let you do that. Look, I grew up in a heavy situation. Single parent. Me and my brother, we were all we had. My mom did the best she could to raise us. And then we lived with my dad for a little bit. He's now deceased, has since repented, but for a moment, it was brutal. So growing up with nothing, it's irrelevant for you to think that you're safe from people like me. It's irrelevant to think that I am not going to do anything for my family, the ones that I care about, whose lives I render more valuable, because you don't find value in my life. Why? Because I say I'm for the Constitution and not for Black Lives Matter? Because I say I'm for the Bill of Rights and I'm not for Antifa? Because I say I'm for the Declaration of Independence and I'm not for the Ku Klux Klan? Many of us stand on that line. Many of our friends, family members have stood beyond the line and paid everything. They've given their whole life, their family's life, dedicated their lineage, their heritage, their legacy now has to be carried on to their sons and daughters as a memory. And I will take that memory, because now it's my turn. I will take that hope and dream and stand against all terrorists, foreign and domestic. Because now you're on my turf. They left, fought, died. We're here. We will stand and we will die. But damn it, you die first. Get it?